Before I go, one thing I've noticed here is that there's a bit of a flat spot right here. That's where the camera has hit the ground at something like that angle. It may not take a filter in that position. I may have to knock that out. So, I think I'll take that retaining ring back off, take this piece off, and then do some minor panel work on that. Yeah, it's quite pronounced. It's also got a very polished look to it. I don't know whether that's just from fingers rubbing over it over the years, or whether somebody has attempted to take the scratch marks out of it by buffing it. But whatever it is, it's a bit flat here, and I don't believe it's going to take a filter. But we'll try. I've got a filter here somewhere. What do we got? Well, here's a close-up lens of the appropriate size, which is 58mm. I'll see if I can get that to start. No, that just won't start. So I'm going to go away and panel beat this, and I'll come back. Basically, I've got to pull this ring outwards here where it's flattened in. I think that's the only significant mark on it. There's another mark over here, but it's much lighter, and I don't think that would cause a problem. Back later. Well, 5 minutes later, I've got this straightened up to the point where it will accept a filter. I'd like to say that runs in very smoothly. It doesn't, but it does run in. That flat spot that was there, I've pulled out, and it'll work now. So that means that you've got to take some care to get the filter to start, but it does start. I'll get it in the right position. There we have it. This is not a particularly stunning example of a filter anyway. It's a cheap one from eBay, but it does the job. Well, there you go, that lens is done now. I'm happy with that. That can go to one side. I've got to deal with its brother. Well, let's hope that this 50mm Xenar lens behaves itself. Just use a friction tool to remove the rear grip. And a friction tool to remove the piece in the centre here too, which holds that filter mount, hood mount in place, the dress ring on the front of the lens. It should be loose. See if I can spin that out. Yes. I think someone's been in there before. There seems to be a ghost of a mark on one of those two screw holes. Right. let's have a look at this. So the order of procedure is much the same as for the xenon. Remove the 3 screws and washers at the front, which hold the lens capsule into the lens body. And that'll lift out. Pop those screws and washers to one side. Check the lens capsule. Focus is a bit stiff perhaps, not too bad, moves freely enough. The diaphragm, that's not bad either. Let's have a look at the lens body. Focus is quite stiff and dry feeling. Depth of field pointers. Bit reluctant to move, and they're off centre. You'll see there. Someone's definitely been in here and done a job on it. If you look at those pointers, you'll notice that there's a bigger gap at this end than there is at this end, at that end of this movement. And at the other end of the movement, there's a big gap here and a small gap there. So the placement of those is incorrect. That would certainly not help the function. Let's get this apart. 4 screws from the back. They are not identical to the other screws we took out. These are much longer, smaller diameter heads. Alright, let's lift this focus mount off the back. As for the xenon lens I've just done, we have the brass coupling here, rangefinder coupling, to suit the Retina 3S rangefinder cameras. This is constructed and assembled in the same way. So I'll take that all to bits. Now here we have our components. Now there may be something missing here. I would have expected to see a shim in the back here, and I'm not seeing one. But some lenses had it, some didn't. Let's take these off in order. That has the larger diameter spring on it. It's one of our depth of field pointers. A little cam. The separator. I'll unhook that spring. That fell off at the other end too. That's just probably a bonus. It's easily damaged when it's left in there. And here's the other depth of field pointer. Now we're down to the focus scale ring, and this is quite stiff in its action. This is held in with 4 screws. 3 of them are simple screws. One of them over here is a post that the spring hooks to, so that's, unless you've got a screwdriver butchered to deal with that, it's a problem. Usually you can work around it, and I'm going to attempt to now, and if not, well, I'll go and find the right screwdriver. Take out these wedges. These wedges are brass. They've got a coating on them some sort of low friction coating, something analogous to Teflon, I would think. Take those out, and we've got our mount all apart. So what I'm looking at here is the state of this. There's a lot of dirt in there, a little bit of grit. I want all of that clean. Likewise here, I can see grit inside there. That certainly won't have been helping the movement of this. Yeah, this looks quite bad, quite dirty too. So these components all need to be carefully cleaned. And once I've got all those cleaned, zoom you out a bit so you can see a little bit more. Once they're all cleaned, I can put this back together and then work back to the other components and get them back in place. So all of this just requires cleaning, naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid and cotton buds, and about 10 tedious minutes, which you don't need to watch. You'll notice there that this pointer is not sitting at 90 degrees. It's swept away over here. I think that someone has done that in an attempt to make the pointers look like they were going to meet at the correct point. And of course really the problem was that they were out one tooth on the gears. So I'll have to straighten that up. Lens mount components clean. I'm just going to apply a bit of molybdenum paste. I'm just checking if I need to put any on these surfaces at all. I think that's all good. This should pretty much be suspended on those wedges. Right, let's get this in place first. Now in order to assemble this, one of these sliding wedges I need to tuck down underneath this track because I won't be able to get it in afterwards otherwise. Where's my mark? My mark's there. I've got to make sure that the focus mark comes up on the focus scale. If it's not on the numbers, then you've got it round the wrong way. It won't want to fit in here. Hook that wedge there in place. This one's not playing the game, that's better. Okay, so that moves smoothly. I'll put the wedges back in place. Of course we've left one in place, that was that post. So I'll just put the wedge in opposite that. Push it into contact with the centre of the lens and do that screw up and see if it moves freely without any rattle. It does, that feels good. I'll just nip that screw up tight. When you're doing the screw up, you have to be somewhat cautious. As you do the screw up, it'll bite onto the top of the wedge and rotate it slightly, which means that it's no longer square to the lens, the centre of the mount, which means that it'll be act as though it was tighter than you thought it was going to be. Now that's pushed the wrong way there. It's definitely moving. Loosen that screw up and try that again. That's good. That's definitely what's happening. It's definitely a little bit too tight. Too loose. That feels good. No, it doesn't. Just take that wedge out and apply some molybdenum to the edge of it. See if that improves things. It might be that the aluminium mount where it runs against there is slightly rough and it's catching. And it's just a balancing act between getting it as snug as you can get it without the movement being unduly stiff. And it needs to be rattle free. If it's too loose, it'll rattle. Something's rubbing somewhere. It might not even be on that component. Back it right out. Of course, it could be the opposite side that's rubbing. It's just or it may be another surface altogether. I'm looking for anything that looks like scuff marks on here, and I don't really see anything. Bit of a bright line there. Well, with a lot of toing and throwing, I've got those wedges all in place. This is moving nice and smoothly, no rattles. That's all looking good, and I can carry on and reassemble the rest of it. So, where do I start? We start with this depth of field pointer here. This one goes over here, I believe. That gear drops down to the lower of the two pinions. I'll take that to the end of its travel and I'll put its spring in place. This is the finer of the two springs. Looking at the state of this spring, because someone's had this off and the ends is a bit stretched, probably stayed. You know, both ends have been stretched. Normally that stays on its post fairly well. I can just tell that it's not going to do so. The spacer can go in, the separator goes in that way round, so it clears the pinion gears, fits over a small tab there, that's spring out from underneath it, that's better. I'll wipe some molybdenum paste in that groove there where the cam rides, and that small cam drops in there. A large pin goes in there. The small pin sticks upright. the other depth of field pointer goes in. The hole in that has to line up with the pin on that cam, and the gearing arranged so that it's at the end of its travel like its mate over here. That's just right. This piece goes on, there's a pin on here where it couples to that cam, goes into the little hole in the cam. And the spring has to hook over that post. That's complete. Now there's an odd looking patch here, it's rough. It looks a bit damaged. I don't know how that could have got like that while the lens was assembled. I think somebody must have accidentally damaged that. This piece goes on over here. And I'll pop that to one side. I'll clean and deal with this lot over here. This is the focus mount. I'll just run a bit of molybdenum paste around the edges here so that this runs smoothly in the mount here. Doesn't need much. If it's assembled absolutely dry, it sort of chatters. There's a rough feeling to it. And run some on that cam surface there where it would couple to the rangefinder. Right, that can be dropped in. Just check it moves smoothly. The retainer plates, there's 3 of these. They go in a specific direction because if you needs to clear that screw hole there, there's a notch in them to do that. Sometimes awkward getting these screws in because the hole in the plate and the diameter of the screw are very much the same. Check that moves freely, it does. Right, these 2 components can be assembled together. Now normally there's a spacer in there, a shim, and there's not one on this lens, and it may have had one or it may never have had one. I'm a bit suspicious. This tab has to couple with this fork here, so I need to get that in a position I can find things. Normally I line it up with one of the screw holes. That one over there, and then just lower this into place. Without disturbing anything. That tab dropped into place, that's all in. Check the depth of field pointers move freely, and they do not. They are unduly stiff in their action. At least they're in the right position relative to each other. but something's making that stuff. I can put a couple of screws in the mount to hold this together while I think about the next move. I think it might be down to a missing shim. I'm not 100% on that. It could be down to that damaged edge that I'd identified earlier too. That might be rubbing on something. Well, they certainly move in, and they're quite good through most of their movement. But right back at smallest aperture, where the point is the furthest apart, they tend to stick. It's not doing it here. I'll put the other two screws in and test again. Certainly has a rough feel to it. I think we'll have this apart. Unfortunately, there's lots of things that can cause problems with this. It's a bit touchy on a good day. Let's take that off. Yeah, it's like it's got a lump there, it doesn't want to pass. Suspicion falls on those pointers, because if they're rubbing on something, that would certainly cause this problem. We know they were bent. It's not this one, because that moves quite freely. Its mate to a lesser extent. A mystery. Could be this cam if it's bent. If the pins aren't parallel, that will certainly do it. Or indeed if the pins are loose, if the riveting is loose on one of the pins, it will not stay in the same plane. It certainly moves freely enough. just checking to make sure there's nothing in that upper pinion that would cause it to be reluctant to move onto the road. This only couples to the upper pinion, so this was the one that looked a bit stiff.